I have been asked, more than once, how a man finds his way back to a place he cannot remember. My answer is always the same: he doesn't find it. It finds him. The road bends a certain direction and his horse follows without being told, and a man who has sense enough to trust the animal instead of his own ragged mind will end up somewhere he needed to be. That is how I came to Heron Creek the second time. Here's what I knew about myself in the autumn of 1883. My name was Cole, because I had a monogram on my saddlebag. My horse was a gray gelding who answered to the click of my tongue. I had been found the previous spring beside a dry wash east of Millbrook by a pair of freighters, breathing but senseless, with a scar on my right temple the shape of a split rail. A fall from my horse, most likely. I had worked a widow's fence line in Millbrook through the summer and tried every evening to piece together who I was. What came back to me was not a story. It was sensation. The smell of wood smoke from a particular kind of pine. The sound of sheep bells in a cold morning. A woman's hands, moving a cloth across a man's forehead with a steadiness that left no room for fear. I did not know whose hands they were. By October I had enough back to know my surname. Britton. Cole Britton, out of Hatchford County, the other side of the Garnet Range. I owned a cattle operation of some size. My foreman had been running it in my absence. I had gone missing the previous October on a solo ride to the winter range. A fall, yes. I could have ridden east then. Something kept me from it. The wood smoke. The sheep bells. The hands. I had learned, in those months of blankness, that the body holds what the mind drops. My body said west, toward the Garnet foothills, toward a valley with a creek. So I went. Heron Creek was not marked on any map I could find. I found it by following the creek itself, upstream from where it crossed the Millbrook Road, through a stand of scrubby juniper, and then a stone cabin was there in the late afternoon light with smoke pulling from its chimney and a small flock of sheep in the side pasture and a broken section of creek fence that someone had shored up with cut juniper branches to hold until proper repair. I sat on my horse at the edge of the yard and looked at that cabin and felt the strangest thing I had felt since the freighters pulled me out of the wash. I felt like I was about to remember something true. The door opened before I could call out. A woman stood in it, not young, not old, somewhere in the country between the two where a person's face has settled into what it is going to be. Dark hair, mostly pinned. A gray work apron. Hands that I recognized before I recognized her face. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. There was no alarm in her. There was something else, a stillness, a careful quiet, that I did not yet understand. "Ma'am," I said. "My name is Cole Britton. I apologize for riding in without warning. I followed the creek and found myself here, and I'm not entirely sure why." She studied me a moment longer. Then she said, "Your horse looks like he could use water." "He could," I said. "There's a trough at the side of the barn." That was all. She stepped back inside and left the door open, and I took it for an invitation. I watered the gray and put him in the lean-to and carried my saddlebag to the porch. She had set a tin cup of coffee on the rail without my asking. I sat on the step and drank it and looked out at the valley and tried to name what I was feeling. Not peace exactly. Something older than peace. Something that did not require me to understand it. She came out after a while with 2 bowls of stew and sat in the chair at the end of the porch, and we ate without talking. The sheep settled in the pasture. The light went off the hills. After a while I said, "I have to ask you something directly." "All right," she said. "Have we met before?" She was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the pasture. Then, "Yes." "When?" "2 winters ago. October, same as now. You came through the valley on foot. Your horse had gone lame somewhere east and you'd walked a day and a half. You had a fever that was getting worse. I brought you inside." I set down my bowl on the porch rail and turned to look at her properly. "How long did I stay?" 8 days, she said. "The fever broke on the 4th. You were up and moving on the 6th. You rode out on the 8th. You left money on the table, more than I'd have asked, and you were gone before I came in from the morning chores. 8 days. I had been in this cabin for 8 days and I had nothing of it but wood smoke and the sound of sheep and the shape of her hands. I don't remember, I said. I did not know how else to say it. I know, she said. I could see it when you rode in. You looked at the cabin the way a person looks at something they're trying to place. She paused. You don't owe me an explanation. It isn't about owing, I said. I had a fall last October. Off my horse, out on the winter range. I lost months. Most of a year. Some of it's come back but not all, and some of what came back is, I stopped. I had a memory of your hands, I said, finally. Just that. Your hands on a cloth. I didn't know whose they were. I followed a feeling west and it brought me here. She was quiet for a long time. The night was settling cold across the valley. Well, she said at last. You found it. Her name was Willa Crane. She'd been at Heron Creek 6 years, since her husband Ned passed of a lung ailment in the winter of '77. She ran the sheep alone, sold the wool in Millbrook in the spring, kept a kitchen garden through the summer. Not prosperous but not desperate, and with the manner of a woman who had decided some time ago that she was going to be all right. I asked her, the next morning, because I stayed the night, in the barn, on clean straw. She showed me without comment. I asked her why she'd taken in a stranger in a fever. She was carrying water from the creek and she set the bucket down and thought about it. You knocked on the door, she said. You were upright but just barely. You asked if I had a place you could sit down. You said please. She picked up the bucket again. I have never in my life turned away a person who said please. I stayed 2 more days helping her repair the creek fence, because it needed doing and because I could not make myself ride away. We worked alongside each other in a comfortable quiet, and I found that my hands remembered the work even when my mind had not yet caught up to the life those hands had lived. On the 2nd day the memory came back. Not all of it. Not in a flood. It came the way things come back when they come at all, in a quiet moment, when I wasn't reaching for it. I was driving a post and Willa was holding the rail and the afternoon light was hitting the creek just so, and I heard her say, easy and low, give it another 2, meaning the post needed 2 more strikes, and something in the cadence of it, the patience of it, landed in me like a key in a lock. I had heard her say that before. Not about a fence post. About something else, something she'd been doing at the stove, and she'd said it to herself and I had been lying in a bunk nearby with a rag across my eyes and a fever that made the ceiling move, and the sound of her voice had been the thing I fixed on to stay in my own body. I stopped driving the post. You talked to yourself while you worked, I said. She looked up at me. I live alone, she said. It's a habit. You said, I stopped and tried to bring it up carefully, the way you handle something fragile. You said, give it time, it knows the way. I thought you were talking to bread dough. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. I was, she said. The bread wasn't rising. And something in me that had been broken for over a year knit itself back a half-turn. Not all the way. But enough. I told her that night what I knew of my life in Hatchford County. The cattle operation, the foreman holding things together, the ranch house I had not been back to in over a year. I told her that I was not a poor man, that I had resources and a place in the world, and that I had spent the better part of a year not knowing any of it and working a widow's fence line in Millbrook for room and board. She listened without interrupting. When I was done she said, what are you going to do? Go back, I said. I have to. There are men depending on the operation and decisions I've let slide too long. I looked at the fire. But I wanted to know, first, where I'd been. What you'd given me. I paused. I left you money. You did, she said. I'd like to leave you more. No, she said. It was not unfriendly. It was simply the word, settled and certain, the way she said most things. Then let me fix your south pasture fence before I go, I said. The juniper bracing won't hold a hard winter. She considered that. All right, she said. It took 3 days. I found the right timber in the tree line above the creek, milled it rough with her hand tools, set the posts, strung the wire. She worked alongside me and we fell into a pattern again, easy and unhurried, and on the 3rd evening I sat on the porch step and looked out at the valley and I did not want to leave. I stayed honest about that. I have learned, in the year I spent not knowing who I was, that honesty is the only thing that does not cost more than it gives. I don't want to go, I said. She was in the chair at the end of the porch, same as the first night. Hatchford County's 2 days east, she said. I know where it is. Your foreman needs direction. He does. Then you should go. I should, I said. Willa. I turned to look at her. When I've gone and settled what needs settling, the ranch, the debts of time I owe, the decisions that waited, I would like to come back here. Not to fix your fence. Not because I owe you anything. Because I would like to know you better than 8 days and 3 days allow. She looked at the pasture for a while. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. Heron Creek doesn't move. That's not a yes, I said. It's not a no, she said. Come back and we'll see what you find. I rode east the next morning. I spent the winter getting Hatchford County back in order, the cattle, the books, the fences that had gone to ruin in my absence. My foreman Peel had kept the operation breathing and I owed him a fair year's bonus and a raise besides. Through all of it I thought about a stone cabin at the end of a creek. A woman who turned no one away who said please. The way bred doe knows the way, if you give it time. I rode back to Heron Creek in April when the snow was off the Garnet Pass. She was in the kitchen garden when I came up the valley, breaking the first ground of the season, and she straightened and looked at me coming down the creek path on the gray gelding and she did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You're earlier than I expected." "Winter moved fast," I said. "Or you did," she said. I got down from the horse. I had a thing to ask and I had spent the ride composing it carefully, and now, standing in front of her with the creek running and the sheep moving in the pasture and the smell of turned earth in the air, all the composed sentences went out of me. "I'd like to stay," I said. "If you'll have me." "Not for fence work." She pulled off her garden gloves and tucked them in her apron pocket. "I've been thinking on it since October," she said. "Since the night you told me you'd followed a feeling west and didn't know why." She looked at me level and plain. "I think that counts for something." "I think it does too," I said. We were married in Millbrook in June, at the small church on the main street, with Peel as my witness and the Millbrook postmistress as hers. She kept the sheep and I kept a string of cattle on the Heron Creek Range, and we built a second room onto the stone cabin the following spring. I have all my memory back now, or nearly all. There are still gaps in days from that lost year that are simply gone, sealed over like a creek after a freeze, and I have made my peace with that. A man does not need to remember everything. He needs to know where he is. What I know is this: I had a life in Hatchford County, and it was a decent life, and I walked away from it one October morning and fell off my horse and lost everything I was for the better part of a year. And in all of that blank time, the only thing that stayed with me was the shape of a woman's hands and the smell of wood smoke from a particular kind of pine. The body holds what the mind drops. I do not know a better argument than Willa Crane for the mercy in that.